A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to request Lata to kindly take us through a short video. Very good evening once again. Creating a compassion curriculum for schools in extraordinary times, the most needed topic at the present time. Today we have with us one of the most leading educator of the present century, Dr. Shalini Advani. If I to speak about all her achievements, then I might take over an hour. So let me speak about it in brief. Presently, Dr. Advani is the director of Pathway School, Noida. Previously, she was a principal of British School, New Delhi, and director education of Learn Today, leading setting up new schools, curriculum development, and teacher training. She had been keynote speaker at conferences nationally as well as internationally. Has been a member of the National Council of Educational Research and Training Steering Committee for Revised English Curriculum, on the editorial group for its English textbooks, and member of NCERT Special Committee to develop reading cells in government schools in Mathura district. Her publications include Growing Up in the Nuclear Shadow, Educating the National Imagination, the essay, The Childhood Sexuality, History, Memory, Mythology in the Dark Room, and as a special editor of an issue of Contemporary Education Dialogue, the National Curriculum Framework 2005, etc. Over to you, ma'am, please.
Thank you very much, Pradipto, for that very generous introduction. So good evening, everybody, and thank you for being here. I know we had a surprising number of registrations, and I know that there are people on Facebook as well who are watching this. And at this time of year, to attend a webinar is very different to what we were all doing in June when schools were closed and you seem to have a lot of time. Now that schools are open, I know the huge effort it takes to log into a session in the evening as well. And I'd really like to thank you very much for doing this. I'm going to try and keep this interactive as far as possible. So there will be times when I'm going to ask you to go on to Mentimeter or to put your views down on chat. So it's not just having you listen. I hope you're going to interact and engage, because in an area like this, or in fact in any area around education, we all bring our own experiences and our own understandings, which are really valuable to share. We hopefully will have time for questions at the end, and also please do put down your questions on chat. I'm not here to provide all the answers to anything. A lot of what I'll talk about will be familiar in terms of what you do already. What my aim is really get us to relook at some of our frames, our assumptions, and perhaps tweak and adjust what we are doing together. So I'm going to begin by sharing my screen. So a compassion curriculum, a compassion-based curriculum, and I'm going to go into what I mean by compassion in a little while. But a compassion-based curriculum is important, obviously, at any time. But at this particular time, there is something extraordinary about what is happening, what young people are having to engage with, often in ways they don't fully understand themselves, the impact of what they're doing and how they're engaging. And that's what we're going to be talking about and taking forward. So just to begin with, these are some of the resources that I will be referring to, just in the interest of giving credit to many of the thinkers that have shaped my ideas. A lot of my thinking comes out of the work of Peter Senge and others, who have done a detailed study about what he calls a compassionate systems framework for MIT at the Abdul Latif Jameel World Education Lab. But there are various others as well. I've taken from Senge, but also thought about how we need to adapt it for our schools in India, for our particular circumstances. So just a little bit of context about our school, where some of the examples are coming from. This is Pathways School in Noida. We have about 1,500 students. The majority are Indian or Indian origin. We have about 11% who come from various different countries around the world. So let's just look at what we mean by extraordinary times. If we look at just the last 5 months, these are the things that have become normative for young people. There has been COVID, of course, and COVID has come with a recognition of death on everybody's doorstep. And this is something that young people are aware of. It's not just another illness, but it is one where many people know people who are in hospital, who are fighting for their lives. And let's just think about the impact of that as a worldview. It's not a worldview that I ever grew up with. It is probably a worldview that was possessed people during wars and wartime, where you could imagine a bomb arriving on the roof of your house. But we as a generation have been fortunate in not having to engage with death in a daily way. And then there is, of course, been the fallout of that, the lockdown, which means doing away with friends, doing away with regular life, doing away with schools and community. Added to that has been the hardship that we know and our children have often engaged with, of migrants, of millions and millions of people going through incredible hardship. And in many of our schools, I know our children have already done some things around that. We've had 2 cyclones, one of which has been catastrophic, the one around Kolkata, so much destruction. We've had locusts arriving right at our doorstep if you're in the NCR and in Rajasthan and in different parts of the country. And there has been a sense routinely of young people having to face catastrophe. Now, it would be absurd to think that this does not have an impact on their worldview. They internalize it. Often what they talk about most is the absence of friends or of school or any of that. But all of these things have made up their world. And we need to look at what is the impact of that on them. When I talk to young people, it's interesting that it's not just the immediate that they're frightened about. By the time they're, 12 or 13 or 14, they have a sense of time in that they know that this is something that will pass. But they have a surprising pessimism about the future. And they talk about whether it is global warming, whether, water is going to run out by the time we have children, whether it is about whether there will be jobs that they will be able to have, the nature of large things, which they feel often helpless about, the world economies, and so how they think about what their future is going to be like is very, very pessimistic. Now, you may have had experiences like this with your children, and just to think about what are the sorts of things in your experience young people have begun to feel pessimistic about. What are their biggest worries? So I would like you to go on to Mentimeet, that's www.menti.com, and up to 3 words, put down what is it that you think young people fear most for the future? What are their biggest concerns? So you have to put in this code after you go to menti.com, 3801225. So if you log on to www.menti.com and put in this code that you can see on your screen, 3801225, that'll take you to this slide. Yeah, so I don't know how many of you have used menti.com. It's a really useful feature. We'll do another version of it in a little while. But what this word cloud does is the letters that are the largest are the ones that are used by more people. So the more common ones, which are repeated by more than a few people, those get larger. So yes, college life, university life, such an important part of their future is something really huge. Health, we talked about, their families, jobs, environment, and the school environment. Physical space, education, employment, emotional behavior change. Yeah, that's another important area. Water and food scarcity. Not being able to travel, and I think that is one that is shared across age groups. I'll just give it another minute. safety, health, resources, employment. These are ones that we can see, the education, the environment. Okay, so what is interesting about this list that you have put up is that these are very big issues, right? It's not, how am I going to do in my grade 10 exam or in my class 12 board? It is, these are huge global issues that young people are frightened about. And so, in our role as educators, we have to engage these. We have to look at how is it that we are to equip them? How do we help them? We can't resolve these problems. So, what is it that we are to do? We need to really rethink the purpose of education. In the light of all of these, what do we educate about? Do we educate in exactly the same way? What are the new emotional needs and how do we fit them into what is our pedagogy? And most of all, how do we help people feel empowered? This is one of the most important things that we can do as educators. If young people just feel that the world is impossible and challenging, but beyond them, and they're helpless, we are going to raise a generation that is very damaged. And they won't even recognize that this is what is happening. What's important for us is to find ways of looking at empowering them, of getting them to understand in larger ways what is happening and why it is happening. So young people are really confused. They want things to change. But if we don't give them directions, there is a sense of helplessness and a sense of frustration. The other big change that has happened in their generation is the recognition that with these issues, solutions aren't individual. It used to be that you work hard and you will do well. That was a solution that was there in people's hands. It was about what you can do. And, depending on what they wanted, it could be you work hard and you will make lots of money, or you work hard, you'll become famous. But this is not enough anymore. So, this recognition that solutions can't be individual, they have to be community based. That is a really important learning for young people to have to engage with and to find as a route to solutions that they're looking for. Basically, this has to be based in a particular notion of compassion. Just as I'm saying that we can't find individual solutions, we have to think about community. And when we think about community, our larger world, then we have to look at the needs, the wants, the desires of other people in that community. And that is where compassion has to come in. As I said, I'm going to go into a definition of compassion, how we need to look at it in this context. But first, I'd like you to please share, what do you think you mean by compassion? It is a well-used word, and there is a lot in philosophy, in religious thinking, etc., which talks about compassion. So in the chat, can you please put down what is your understanding of compassion? How is it different to empathy? All right, desire, enthusiasm for the task we do. And also, please look at empathy. See if you can distinguish between the two. All right, compassion is feeling the needs of others. Empathy is putting yourself in the shoes of others. To feel and understand others, understanding and taking perspective. Compassion is recognizing suffering in others and taking action. So service before self is compassion is acting upon empathy, working together. Compassion is more of pity and empathy is to understand others. Compassion is concern for others, whereas empathy is understanding the feelings of others. Compassion is displayed in action. Empathy is what you feel. Compassion is a precursor to empathy. Okay, that's a variety of really important definitions. So there is a sense of importance of caring, of empathy, of service, but also of looking at each other's perspective and doing something about it. So thank you for that. Let me go back to looking at these. So the classic definition of the understanding of compassion, and it's there in philosophical writing, it's there in religion. Compassion is usually seen as the intention of alleviating others and to have joy and happiness in their existence. That comes out of Buddhism. It comes out of various different religions. It often implies action because there is the sense of alleviating suffering or doing service. And empathy is an essential precursor. It's an essential base because it is the capacity to sense and feel the emotions of others. Because you can't act without that sense of connect, of a larger human connection. We do a lot around empathy through self-knowledge, through social and emotional learning, to getting a sense of standing in other people's shoes and moving with based on our understanding of them. This whole aspect of what the emotions are is really important for us to understand. Now, in India, in India, because it's a country of such inequality, that the difference between me and others is very, very stark. Every time you have a beggar child coming and knocking on your car window, there is an emotion that is evoked. Or when you find out about, people's lives having been destroyed through a natural catastrophe, There is an emotion that is evoked. Along with that, many people, many of us feel that, this generation or young people don't want to engage too much with the rest of the world. They have a sort of indifference. They get on with what they want to do. And it's very hard. I've tried as a teacher, somebody might say. I've tried as a teacher, and they do all the activity and all, but you don't feel as though it's really making a difference. I would say that that's a kind of often an aggressive indifference. And in all our classrooms, we have young people who display that, who are determined not to care. Because I believe that it is part of our human impulse to care, but sometimes we just can't deal with it. And so you focus on, well, this is my life. This is what I can do. So just out of curiosity, it would be interesting to share. Now, and this I recognize is a very broad generalization you're going to give. That where do you feel that the majority of your students sit? Do they sit in an area of empathy, of pain for others? Often that is for middle class people or upper middle class people, there is guilt. So that is one set of emotions. Or on the other hand, is there a kind of aggressive indifference? So using the same code that you used earlier, if you can go back to Mentimeter, and I will just go on to the next slide, if I can. I'm trying to see how to, there is something I'm not doing right. Just give me a minute. Yeah. So, what is the majority of responses? Again, I recognize it's a generalization, as I said, but that most young people. So as you can see, it's an interesting division. There is a larger percentage at the moment who feel the empathy, the pain, the guilt, but there is a significant number who feel the aggressive indifference as well. Let's just give it another minute. Okay, so as you can see in the number of people who have so far put it in, it's about 50, so about 2/3 feel that there is the emotions of pain and guilt and empathy, and 1/3 feel that there is what I am calling aggressive indifference. You might just call it indifference. So if we look at what these results are implying, and let's just think about what they mean. There's an important question that why is it aggressive indifference? And can it be passive indifference? I agree that it can, but I would say that they're two sides of the same coin. Indifference comes often out of a sense that, well, there's nothing I can do about it. So why bother? And it is exactly that emotion that we need to engage with, that we need to think about, can we get through it in, find out what it is that we can do that would engage with this? Can we make a shift in any way? What are the roads that we can make a shift with? This is, I feel that, we need to go into what is the nature of the feeling that there is. And it's often more complicated than one would like to think. And this is from the ABEA handbook. The ABEA has actually created a handbook around compassionate systems, which has got some very interesting ideas. So there is this ladder which it talks about. At the bottom is what we have just been talking about, emotional disconnect. It is not going to impact me. So whether that is passive or aggressive is up to us to judge. The next is, and it's related to the emotional disconnect, the rest is empathic distress, where you feel a sense of distress at what is happening, and you can't deal with your own feelings. And because, it is disturbing, it is upsetting, you say, there is nothing that I can do. So you switch off it. The third is what is called in-group empathy, which is that you belong to a group. And what you believe very strongly is the beliefs and the views of that group. And you are therefore hostile to the views and the belief system of another group. So it could be, with very little children saying boys are stupid. And you don't really want to engage with somebody, with a child who says, no, they're not so bad. Or it might be political beliefs, or it might be religious beliefs. What all of it does is that because it is part of your group, it reduces an understanding and empathy with any other group. Then there is cognitive empathy, which is that you develop a perspective, you have an awareness of what the other person might be thinking, but it is passive. Above that, you have altruism, which is engaging with, assisting others with no expectation of any personal benefit. And then there is neutral awareness, which is that there is no judgment, that either positive or negative, but you're there available to provide assistance. Maybe, a medical team does that. And then at the top, you have agape, which is this Greek word, which really means unconditional love. An unconditional love on others based on understanding that we are all a part of a whole. In everyday life, you have that, say, maybe what a parent feels for a child. So it's really important to think about where is the emotion coming from? What is it that is happening when we have an attitude to the world around? So the compassion that I am talking about, which is a compassion systems, is basically not just empathy, but it's a systemic property of mind. And what I'm suggesting is that that can only happen if you go beyond the individual case, beyond the individual beggar child, beyond the individual situation, to look at the larger systemic forces that are influencing people's actions. And this is the compassionate systems framework that Senghi, etc., talk about. So it's an understanding of the structural source of problems that go beyond individuals, so that we don't blame individuals for problems that arise out of a larger system. You know, the belief that, oh, you know, these beggars are just lazy, or actually they're making a lot of money. And, you know, it's just that they like begging. So those are the larger sort of attitudes, which are frames of thinking, which can't happen if you really look at, for instance, beggary. What makes people into beggars? Because if we don't look at this systemic framework, we're left to just deal with that individual beggar or that individual circumstance. And we blame others. And we miss our own agency, our own role in shaping those circumstances. So let me give you an example of what we all do in schools, because I believe that in all our schools, we try and work very hard at what it is that will create sensitivity, that will lead to action. So these are some examples of my school where our children went off on the Fridays for the Future and the climate change. We had a whole event around climate change, where there was a lot of engagement that children had about social responsibility around that. Our children go out to all the underprivileged schools around. They will teach children there. They will raise funds. They'll equip their computer labs. We have children who come into our school who do sports coaching, or, you know, will learn computers. And I know that we all in our schools do things like that. But if one looks at a compassion system framework, it's a combination of the empathy that we were talking about, walking in somebody else's shoes, but also looking at the larger system within which this functions. So let me give you an example. Yeah, something that we're all familiar with. The whole migrant crisis, the millions of people who walk 500, 800 kilometers to get home. And in many of our schools, we did fundraising, we gave food, we did all of that. And we talked about the migrants as a group. And as soon as we did that, we de-individualized them. For all our thoughtful approach. If we instead also go a little deeper, in addition to doing all of the things that we have done, and look at them about, think about why would they stay? And let's just look at some data that there is around them. Yeah, that these are people who are on usually one-day contracts. They never have food for more than a couple of days. So if you have a shutdown, that becomes a very long issue. 66 lived in shared rented rooms, 31% on the footpath. The average daily earning is just over 300 rupees, and they don't work every day. They work 19 days in the month. But why do they come? Because they're able to send home on an average 2,289 rupees. And an average family in the village earns just about that. So by coming, even if by living on the footpath and working, they're doubling their family income. 33% say that in the past year they experienced violence. And often that has been because some richer people have complained about them. And they have a strong sense that they are the dregs of society. Now, if you look at these people and you think of it in terms of what we're talking about, we tend to be shaped by our own sort of ways of thinking. If we had to look at the migrants as just as one example, yes, we'd look at the mental models within which they're fitting. We'd look at the fact that maybe we need to relook at our laws. Maybe we need to look at our healthcare systems, which make it possible for somebody who is without work for 4 days to be near starvation. What are the rights that people who come, and some of these people in the study that I was reading have been here for 10 years. What does it mean to be somebody who is employed for 10 years and yet not be able to be sure that you will survive? That's when you start getting people engaging with systems, with not just the crisis at that moment when it happened, but in a larger way, engaging with the world and the way that we think about it. So it's important to not just have people create some standardized models, but get them to think about what are the models that we're working with. And if we can help children create slightly different models, we help them to become the architects of their own thinking. So rather than replicate standard systems, to be able to interrogate them and go ahead with finding solutions. And that whole aspect of finding solutions, and I know that in many of our schools, children have come up with individual ideas. That is what you need to do, because that is the route to empowerment for young people. So looking very practically at a school curriculum, what are all these big ideas that I'm talking about, what would they look like? This is just one suggestion, and we may have others. What is the big idea in primary school? Is that you introduce the idea that different people have different access. They have that resources are not equally shared. And that whole aspect of empathy, of creating a connection, and of course, the belief that we can help. So it could be, collecting things for toy bank, or notebook, or clothes, or books, or stationery, or water conservation, all the things that we do. But if we can have it sit within a larger framework of intention, that is what makes the difference. In the middle school, you introduce the whole issue of equity. And I just like to pause and think about what's the difference between equity and equality. Right, equality is based on the idea that is in our constitution, that everybody has the same rights. Everybody, for instance, has equal access to education, to clean drinking water. That's the right that everybody has. So as a country, as a constitution, we believe in equality. The truth is that not everybody can access them in the same way. Some need to overcome large obstacles to be able to access these, whether it is water, whether it is education, whatever all of these things are. Also in middle school, you introduced this as an idea that it's not just about our society, but that there are across the world divisions between those who are less enabled, those who have less equity, and those who have more. That is how societies tend to be structured. So, for instance, if you see a connect between the Aboriginals in Australia and our Adivasis, or if you look at the similarities between race and caste in India, a lot of children are very aware about Black Lives Matter and all of those things, and the whole equality that should happen regardless of color. And yet, within our own society, caste works in exactly the same way as race works in other societies. Or, that disability rights vary in different countries. And in senior, you think of ways of thinking. So, which enable these, which enable this lack of equity. So maybe issues of gender, so that they start thinking about the toxicity of certain forms of masculinity, or feminism as a thought process. The idea that you have to be female to be feminist. Can boys be feminist? Or LGBTQ rights, or about economic systems at large. Who has power? Who has the control in a society? Is it just about hard work that I talked about earlier? And what are the sort of interventions that we have had? This is when they can look at, the role of WHO and how effective is it? Or the Gates Foundation. What are the pros and cons of that? So that they begin to look critically and analytically at all of these things. Now, what is important when you're looking at a systemic thought process, a compassion framework, is, as you can see from all of these examples that I've given, and they're only examples, that they don't happen in just one lesson, in a tutor lesson or in a pastoral care lesson. This goes back to what I had talked about, is that we need to rethink the frames of our curriculum. And what we talk about a lot in our curriculum is about success. We don't very much talk about failures. And all of these communities that are here are part of the failures of society. And it is important for young people to think about that and the causes of failure, and to look at the systems which support the fact that some people fail and some people succeed. So I'm going to ask you now, I'm going to show you an example of something we do in my school and talk to you about it. And I want you to tell me, based on what I'm saying, would this fit into a compassion system framework? So we have this event called a Day of Sharing, where we look at our support staff and what we do for them. And our support staff do a show for the children, and then everybody has a langar lunch, which is served by our senior school children. Everybody sits together and eats lunch. Now tell me, to what extent would you say that this fits into our compassion framework? So if you will put your views down on chat. And if you can, what my question is that will it fit into a compassion system framework or does it not? So far, most people are agreeing that it does. So teaching students to share and to care. Children are trying to care for them. It builds empathy, but I'm not sure it creates enough critical thinking and why these differences exist. It's a compassionate act, but I don't think it fits into the framework. Sensitizing children. All right, students are engaging with the world, not just a crisis. They're finding a solution and constructing new ways of thinking. To a certain extent, will the children only do it? Will the children do it on a daily basis without asking them to do so? It does somewhere, probably the thinking starts to happen. It's an act of gratitude and first steps towards compassion and framework. It's compassionate, but does not get students to feel the hunger people feel or the poverty. Okay, let me say that as far as the framework goes, it is a very, very minimal level. So what happens? It is true. It is important because it creates empathy. So it creates a sense that we all need to be sitting together and we should be able to eat together. But precisely because it is a one-off, it is a day, it is an event, it does not get people to question what is the big deal about everybody eating together. Yeah, we know that, when you travel abroad, if you have your coach driver or bus driver who will sit at the table next to you or a plumber, there's no big deal. Nobody is surprised by that. There is a sense of equality, of being able to eat together. In India, there is such a huge difference. And in ways that we don't even recognize, it even has a caste basis to it. Because people who have somebody come in and work in their home, they don't use the same utensils. They would not sit and eat together. So, yes, it does create a sense. It introduces at a base level that we need to have empathy, we need to have equality, but it doesn't really get anybody to question anything. And I put it out there because honestly, for a long time, we felt happy as a school that, we have events like this. But if it is only left at that as an event, then you're building empathy, but you are not really questioning the framework within which that happens. And so to that extent, there is a feel-good aspect, there's a charity aspect. You feel as though you, as somebody who's, a more privileged person, done something for others, and it creates a little bit of a halo. And I'm not knocking that. I think that, it is important to also have that. All I'm saying is that it's not sufficient. All right. So, this whole process about understanding and learning complex issues, we often find that there is a resistance in schools to taking those up. So there is a research, I've put it down there, there's a very interesting global research which discusses this, that students want to learn about complex contemporary issues or conflict, but often teachers avoid these. Partly, sometimes they are upset, they fear upsetting people, upsetting belief systems, what parents might feel. Sometimes it's just that they feel inadequately prepared to take up these complex issues. And there is something for us to think about in terms of how we train teachers and how we enable teachers in these ways. And of course, for certain sorts of areas, and I'm going to give you an example about that in a moment, there even a little worry about what would be government legislation or what would be the point of view of larger society. And of course, this is the world our children inhabit. Yeah, 20% below the poverty line, only 12% don't even have any access to water. Look at the difference between the numbers in primary and secondary. That shows the fallout rate after primary school. So our children live with class divisions, they live with caste, they live with environmental issues, and a host of other issues as part of their world. So now I'm going to give you two examples of what we have done. One was, it came out of the anti-CAA protests. And this was done by one of our history teachers, our middle school history teacher in the school, who looked at what was this whole issue, what was the concerns, and what is there in our constitution. And instead of going into this in any detail about what is there in the constitution, what are the rights and wrongs of the protest, what this teacher did, and we did this for a whole school, was to read the preamble to the constitutions of different countries. And by looking at what is it that the constitution of each of those countries brings out, it created an understanding, a framework of understanding. So that is where you went beyond the issue of just the CAA protests to the whole area of what is it that different countries stand for? How do they define themselves? And it was an interesting exercise in reading what it enabled students to begin to think about what is it that India stands for and what are the belief systems here. The other example is a very big frame of something called othering. And this is something that is there. It's a really important understanding for everybody to have, which is that we create, you remember I had spoken about mental models. We create certain mental models. So we create a sort of demonic vision of another who we don't know very well, and we create stereotypes around those. And it's important as part of our education program to encourage people to look at stereotypes and what is the effect of those. So just first looking at a couple of the central ideas, and then I'm going to play you a short film about this. So these were the ideas we wanted, and you'll see them in the film as well. When we make a group the other or strange, we point out seeming weaknesses to make ourselves look stronger or better. It suggests a hierarchy and keeps power with the majority. By creating a group as the other, we make up a reason for hostility. And that is the important aspect. And we do this through generalization. Here are some examples of generalizations. And now let me play you the various things. So we did this as a school-wide activity from primary to senior, where all children engaged with the idea of othering.
According to me, the main purpose of Shiroka was to point out the reality of and what is happening between countries right now. So, just like I said, there on right side there are negative words which depict the reality, like discriminations and which happen in countries right now. And on the left side there are positive words, like it's like hope and peace, which should happen. And what we're trying to depict is that these positive words should be the reality.
This blog is actually about the othering and the differences that we are creating nowadays and how we can reduce these differences. So some examples for othering might be economically. So if a person is not doing economically well, so we tend to leave him out, or his skin tone.
So we like posted like some examples like of real day different othering that comes like for, and also events that happened in the past, such as the Berlin Wall, the India-Pakistan partition, and Palestine-Israel conflict. Palestine is not being treated fairly because like their voice is not being heard. Was an emotional experience for a lot of students here because there was a very personal connect. They were able to sort of connect with the theme othering from personal experiences in their life, and I think that's what makes this whole event
such an invaluable experience at their respective age groups?
I learned that it's like we should start from ourselves first. Like we don't realize while doing it, but we actually leave some people out who shouldn't be left behind. Like they should be with us.
Okay, so from that, you can see that, you know, when you take a complex idea, these are the sorts of learnings that young people are able to develop. And that is what is the framework of thinking. That there is no one eternal external truth out there. It's how we see things. Or this whole idea of diversity. These are the big ideas that that often underlie in our minds as adults. What are the activities and actions we want students to participate in? But what we're really looking at is for them to be able to articulate these, to be able to understand the larger frames within which they function. And finally, again, to come back to some practical aspects as a school, it's important to get young people to try and capture their own learning, their own thinking process. So something like a reflection portfolio, in which over the years, as they move from maybe class 4 to 5 to 6 to 8 to 10 to 12, to look at what do they do? What are notable moments? To think about who they are and their own experiences, their own belief systems, and then to engage with some larger ideas. And these questions, how you answer and the understanding you have in class 5 and then again in class 11, are going to be different. And it's important for a young person to be able to see their own development and growth in that. And also to think about ways of action. What are strategies? Because that too is important for them to feel enabled, for them to feel that they have some power. They have to answer that last question, what can you do to make other people care? And how can you develop support for your thought process? So I'm going to stop with that. And I don't know if if we have time for questions.
We can take a couple of questions, ma'am.
Right. Or if there are any questions.
There are no questions yet. I would request the participants to please put your questions in the chat box so that ma'am can answer them.
Yeah, or even any sharings or comments or disagreements or. Okay, I think we're good with that.
I see no questions yet, ma'am, but I really feel like you've left everybody with a lot of food for thought. So there's a lot of reflection that, you know, I think all of us need to go back and do.
Absolutely. Thank you, ma'am. This is Anuradha here from ABEA. I think you've touched upon a very, very pertinent point. And at this point, when we're all dealing with the pandemic, children are going through a lot. It's hardly that as adults we realize that children have so much, they think such a lot and they think about the future, worry about the future. So how is it that we're building compassion within them? And you really touched upon this compassion cycle, the curriculum, and it's like one size doesn't fit all. It's you need to see the students that you're dealing with and deal with them on a daily basis, understand what they can do. And I think talking to them, making them understand is something that we as adults can do it the best. And you've touched upon a lot of issues, compassion, empathy, how you can build the practical examples that you gave of your school, and the very fact that you said that you just touched the tip of the whole thing when you spoke about having lunches. I think there's a viral video going on from Sudhamurthy nowadays, which she speaks about how young people and all of us need to have food with your people, the help that you go around, and you've touched upon that so very well. And we've got a lot of learning to take back as teachers into our schools, and how we can implement this when the current online classes are going on is something that we'll need to take it back from here. So thank you so much for such a
There's
wonderful
just
session this evening.
one particular comment or question that I'd like to take up, because I think that is important for all of us, which is Basabi,
Yeah, sure.
about how can we engage all educators to participate in this kind of frank and honest opinion as you're having. And, I'd go back to that point about what is it that people fear? Why is it that people don't do this? And I think an important strategy in a school is to be able to have talks and discussions around this. We live in a very polarized world. And, this world of social media has made us more and more live in our own echo chambers. We've got more and more uncomfortable with alternate points of view. And I think it is part of our role as educators to go on challenging those and break those down. But also is the information aspect, because I agree with the assumptions of that question, which is that the educators themselves need to first engage with this. So if you, for instance, have a talk using an example I used over here, about, who are the migrants. You have somebody who's worked with migrants to just come and talk to your teachers about issues like that. That begins then to open up spaces. It begins to open up, you have somebody who is an LGBTQ rights activist come and talk to students and teachers. Those sorts of engagements and discussions then begin to break down some of the implicit opinions that people have. Somebody's a teacher of physics or geography or whatever, but they're a whole person. They come with their whole belief systems, their whole politics. And all of those things are an assumption which go into a class when you're discussing these sorts of topics, when you're doing social and community work or SUPW, whatever, all of those. So it is important to try and build some understanding of the world by doing those sorts of sessions, having those sorts of discussion groups.
Absolutely. I think I completely agree with your point that more and more as families, as individuals, we are all living in our own silos. And as nuclear families today, if families themselves are not exposed to this, how can we extend this to our children? So, and there's so many issues around, and if we do not participate in them as communities, which you rightly started off your presentation with, and we do not extend this beyond community, and this is the time when, the whole bit of community feeling extended beyond ourselves is coming. And I hope this pandemic and this kind of a situation lends itself to a greater ongoing learning, as well as a feeling of community and helping others in many ways, and helping our children to kind of develop this as a lifelong process. If that happens, it'll be a great learning for all of us. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for this session today. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
We have a lovely comment here, which I'd just like to read. Thank you. In the period of crisis, I have attended so many workshops, but nobody could give me such a good, positive hope for the future, where one can live all together and bringing up our children with compassion and empathy. Why are we so divided? Why is it so? So I think Basavi's comment kind of cements this session this evening. So thank you, Basavi, for writing this. And on this note, we end our session. Stay safe and stay well, all of you. Thank you from ABEA.
Thank you.